At 4:48 a.m., before the taxis start honking, and before the sun stretches over Johannesburg's skyline, something shifts that most people never see. A construction crew signs in. A clinic opens with a full staff list for the first time in months. A young graduate checks an email that begins with, "We're pleased to inform you." None of them is thinking about percentages. None of them is debating fiscal frameworks. But somewhere in Pretoria, a line on a chart moves from 31.9% to 31.4%, the lowest unemployment rate since 2020. That number doesn't celebrate. It doesn't scream success. It doesn't erase struggle. Over 8 million people are still searching for work. Yet something feels different. Why now? Why construction? Why community services? Why youth financing at this exact moment? And what does it mean when Africa's largest economy finally bends a curve that refused to move for 5 years? Let's find out. The shift did not begin in a conference hall. It began in dust. If you drove through parts of Gauteng in late 2025 and you noticed something subtle but undeniable, scaffolding that had been frozen in place is climbing again. Projects that sat half-complete, skeletons of intention, now hum with movement. Trucks move in tighter rotations. Cement mixers don't idle as long. Shift whistles are sharper. Construction was one of the key sectors pushing South Africa's unemployment rate down to 31.4% in the final quarter of 2025, the lowest since 2020. And in 2026, in less than 2 months, it has gotten even lower. That detail matters more than people realize. Construction is not an elite industry. It does not hire only the university educated. It absorbs artisans, welders, machine operators, general laborers, technicians, drivers, and safety inspectors. It spreads income quickly, and income spreads stability. When construction accelerates, it does more than create jobs. It signals capital confidence. It tells suppliers to prepare inventory. It tells banks that risk appetite is returning. It tells municipalities that stalled infrastructure can be revived. For years after the pandemic peak, many projects paused under the weight of fiscal strain, energy instability, and procurement bottlenecks. Developers hesitated. Public works pipelines slowed. Small contractors collapsed under delayed payments. The mood hardened. But in 2025, a recalibration began. Certain energy pressures eased. Procurement systems moved faster in targeted zones. Urban renewal initiatives restarted. Housing developments that had been paper promises began materializing in brick and steel. Construction is mechanical optimism. It doesn't talk. It builds. Every crane represents a wager on tomorrow. Every foundation poured is a declaration that someone believes the structure will be completed. That belief has economic consequences. Workers earn wages. Wages circulate through local economies. Spaza shops see more traffic. Taxi drivers see more fares. The multiplier effect ripples outward. This is why the unemployment drop is not abstract. It is physical. And it reveals something else. Recovery did not arrive through speculative finance or sudden foreign rescue. It came from domestic structural movement, from inside the system. That matters for a generation tired of waiting for external validation. But construction is not infinite. It depends on sustained capital flow, regulatory clarity, and energy reliability. If the power supply falters again, productivity shrinks. If budgets tighten abruptly, projects freeze. So the question is not simply whether construction created jobs, it is whether this sector is the spark or the foundation. Because if steel is speaking again, we must ask, who ensured the electricity stayed on long enough for it to do so? The cranes could not have moved if the lights were still flickering. For years, South Africa's economy operated under the shadow of uncertainty. Load-shedding schedules shaped business hours. Manufacturers calculated production risk not by demand, but by electricity availability. Small enterprises purchased diesel generators instead of hiring new staff. Confidence drained slowly, quietly. Energy instability does something brutal to an economy. It freezes ambition. When the power supply began stabilizing in 2025, not perfectly, not permanently, but measurably, it unlocked more than machines. It unlocked predictability. And predictability is oxygen for employment. Factories extended shifts because they could. Warehouses processed inventory without interruption. Retailers operated full trading hours. Construction sites poured concrete without racing against blackout windows. Even service industries, call centers, tech startups, and logistics hubs functioned without the silent tax of generator fuel. This stabilization did not appear dramatic. There were no celebratory headlines. But operational reliability changes hiring behavior almost immediately. When output stabilizes, businesses forecast revenue more confidently. When forecasts stabilize, labor planning follows. This is how the unemployment rate edged downward. Energy reform has been slow, politically sensitive, and structurally complex. State utility restructuring, private generation allowances, and grid maintenance upgrades are technical battles, not emotional ones. But technical battles decide economic outcomes. When energy constraints ease, investment hesitancy softens. Domestic investors reconsider expansion. Foreign investors reassess risk calculations. Even small contractors rethink scaling. South Africa's 31.4% unemployment rate in Q4 2025 reflects that mechanical relationship between electricity and employment. There is also a psychological dimension. Rolling blackouts erode national morale. They create a sense of fragility. When reliability improves, even incrementally, perception shifts, and perception influences behavior. Consumers spend differently when they trust infrastructure. Entrepreneurs launch differently when they trust continuity. Energy stability is not glamorous, but it is foundational. And yet, electricity alone does not generate opportunity for the millions who remain unemployed. It creates the environment. It does not create the initiative. Which brings us to the next layer of the shift, the people stepping into that newly reliable environment, armed not with resumes, but with business ideas. If power has returned to the grid, can power now return to the youth? Electricity makes possibilities real, but the possibility still needs someone bold enough to step into it. For years, South Africa's youth carried a contradiction heavier than any statistic. Educated, connected, digitally fluent, yet locked out of formal employment. Youth unemployment has hovered far above the national average, shaping a generation that learned early not to rely on the old corporate ladder. So when the government deployed a 2.5 billion rand youth fund in late 2025, it wasn't charity. It was pressure responding to pressure. The fund aims to provide loans and structured support to young entrepreneurs, not grants thrown into the wind, but capital tied to viability. Small enterprises, tech startups, local manufacturers, agro-processing ventures, creative industries, township retail networks, the kind of businesses that grow horizontally before they grow vertically. This is where the unemployment story deepens. Formal employment absorbs labor slowly in an economy of this scale, but small businesses scale fast when friction drops. A young founder who secures financing hires two people. Those two hire suppliers. Suppliers stabilize inventory. Inventory drives circulation. That circulation is employment by chain reaction. Gen Z in South Africa does not dream in traditional timelines. They grew up watching global creators monetize from bedrooms. They watched African fintech explode in Lagos and Nairobi. They saw young innovators build payment rails, logistics platforms, fashion brands, and digital agencies. What they lacked was structured domestic backing at scale. The Youth Fund attempts to close that gap. But this is where realism matters. Capital without mentorship collapses. Loans without oversight default. Scaling requires ecosystems, incubators, regulatory clarity, access to markets, and procurement inclusion. The real question is not whether 2.5 billion rand exists. The real question is whether it circulates intelligently. If managed effectively, youth-led enterprises can begin absorbing labor outside traditional corporate channels. This diversifies the employment base. It reduces over-reliance on a few dominant sectors. It injects innovation into stagnant markets. And here's the geopolitical angle. Economic agency shifts perception. When young Africans build businesses rather than wait for multinational absorption, the power balance inside the economy tilts. But there is tension. Will the youth fund empower risk-takers in townships and peri-urban areas, or will bureaucracy redirect it toward those already networked and connected? If this capital genuinely reaches the impatient, ambitious, system-weary youth, the unemployment curve may not just bend, it may accelerate downward. But youth energy alone cannot repair structural fractures. So the next question becomes unavoidable. What system are these young entrepreneurs actually stepping into? Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Ambition is powerful, but ambition inside a broken structure exhausts itself. The young entrepreneur who secures youth fund capital still has to register a company, navigate municipal compliance, secure permits, manage tax obligations, and negotiate procurement pipelines. If those systems are slow, opaque, or politicized, momentum dies quietly. So the deeper story behind South Africa's 31.4% unemployment rate is not just sectoral growth or youth financing. It is institutional recalibration. For years, bureaucratic drag slowed economic activity, delayed municipal payments, collapsed small contractors. Procurement disputes stalled projects. Regulatory uncertainty frightened private investors. State-owned enterprise instability shook confidence. Reform is not dramatic, it is administrative. In 2025, incremental adjustments began tightening this machinery. Procurement turnaround times improved in certain municipalities. Public sector audits intensified. Energy market participation widened to private producers. Logistics bottlenecks at key ports received renewed attention. None of these trends is online, but it shapes employment. When a contractor receives payment on time, payroll stabilizes. When port congestion reduces, exporters ship faster. When licensing processes accelerate, businesses formalize rather than remain informal. These are invisible multipliers. President Cyril Ramaphosa's administration has repeatedly emphasized efficiency, anti-corruption mechanisms, and investment attraction. Critics argue that progress is uneven. Supporters argue the direction is correct. Both debates exist simultaneously, but the unemployment figure reflects one undeniable fact. Something in the machinery moved enough to allow hiring to expand. Still, structural inequality remains embedded. Spatial apartheid geography persists. Townships remain distant from commercial hubs. Transport costs erode wages. Education mismatches limit employability. Reform must therefore operate on multiple fronts: infrastructure, governance, education alignment, energy reliability, and fiscal sustainability. And fiscal sustainability is where tension sharpens. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana faces a balancing act. Public debt management cannot be ignored. Social spending cannot be abandoned. Growth stimulus cannot be reckless. If fiscal policy tightens too aggressively, momentum stalls. If it loosens without discipline, instability returns. This is the narrow bridge South Africa is crossing. Youth entrepreneurs need efficient systems. Construction firms need predictable payments. Social service hiring requires budget sustainability. Energy stability requires capital investment. If the system continues recalibrating, not collapsing, not freezing, then the unemployment drop is sustainable. But if reform fatigue sets in, if political cycles override administrative discipline, the curve could flatten again. And that brings us to a wider frame. Is this domestic recalibration isolated or part of something larger unfolding across Africa? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. No economy on this continent moves alone. When South Africa's unemployment rate dipped to 31.4%, it did not happen in a vacuum sealed by borders. It happened in a continent already shifting its posture, politically, economically, psychologically. Across West Africa, sovereignty debates have intensified. In the Sahel, leaders have challenged traditional security alignments and redefined diplomatic priorities. In East Africa, trade corridors are expanding under the African Continental Free Trade Area. In North Africa, Industrial partnerships are diversifying beyond old dependencies. The mood is not identical everywhere, but the undertone is unmistakable. Control the lever, or the lever controls you. South Africa occupies a unique position in this landscape. It is Africa's most industrialized economy and one of its largest consumer markets. Its banking system integrates deeply into regional finance. Its ports and logistics networks anchor southern African trade flows. Migration patterns from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and beyond reinforce its gravitational pull. When employment improves in South Africa, remittances stabilize in neighboring states. When construction expands in Johannesburg or Durban, supply chains stretch into Botswana and Namibia. When social services hire, internal stability strengthens, which reduces regional volatility. So the unemployment drop is not just domestic arithmetic, it is a continental signal. Gen Z across Africa is hyper-aware of continental momentum. They compare Lagos fintech with Nairobi innovation. They compare Ouagadougou's sovereignty rhetoric with Pretoria's institutional reform. They compare policy speed, they compare results. There is impatience everywhere. South Africa's approach is not revolutionary in tone. It is institutional in design. But institutional reform can be just as transformative as dramatic declarations if sustained. Here is where perspective broadens. For decades, Africa's macro story was told through external lenses: credit ratings, commodity cycles, and aid frameworks. Today, internal metrics matter more. Youth absorption rates, infrastructure output, energy reliability, intra-African trade growth. South Africa's bending of its unemployment curve aligns with this continental recalibration toward internal stabilization. And here's the psychological layer: confidence compounds. If Africa's largest economy demonstrates steady employment improvement, investor psychology shifts. Not speculative hype, structural confidence. Domestic pension funds allocate differently. Regional investors hedge less defensively. Entrepreneurs scale with less hesitation. Confidence is contagious, but contagion can work in reverse. If momentum falters, skepticism spreads quickly, which leads to the decisive question: is South Africa simply catching its breath after 5 stagnant years, or is it quietly anchoring a broader African repositioning? History rarely announces itself when it changes direction. It shifts like wind, first subtle, then undeniable. South Africa's unemployment rate at 31.4% is not a triumph. It is not relief. It is not redemption. It is still one of the highest rates in the world. Over 8 million people remain outside the labor market. That weight does not disappear because a decimal moved. But direction matters more than drama. For 5 years, the line refused to bend. It hovered stubbornly above 30%, reinforced by pandemic shock, energy instability, fiscal strain, and global uncertainty. Stagnation becomes psychological after that long. It seeps into households, into classrooms, into dinner table conversations. Nothing changes becomes the default narrative. Now something has changed. Construction is active. Energy reliability has improved enough to stabilize output. Social services have expanded hiring. Youth capital is being deployed into enterprise rather than locked in rhetoric. Institutional systems, though imperfect, are recalibrating instead of freezing. This is not explosive growth. It is structural repositioning. And repositioning is harder than revolution. It requires discipline. It requires patience. It requires political restraint and administrative consistency. The question facing South Africa now is not whether unemployment has fallen once. The question is whether it can fall again and again without collapsing under fiscal pressure or reform fatigue. Momentum is fragile. Energy stability must hold. Youth financing must circulate intelligently. Public sector efficiency must deepen. Infrastructure pipelines must continue flowing. If those variables align, then this quarter will not be remembered as statistical noise. It will be remembered as the quarter when the wind shifted. There is also a generational dimension. Gen Z in Africa does not accept slow improvement easily. They want acceleration. They want a visible transformation. But structural economies do not sprint, they compound. If each quarter builds upon the last, even incrementally, compound momentum becomes undeniable within years. And compound momentum changes geopolitical posture. A South Africa that steadily reduces unemployment strengthens its continental influence. It stabilizes migration flows. It anchors Southern African trade. It becomes less reactive to external financial pressure. Its policy voice carries weight not because of rhetoric, but because of results. This is where the wider African narrative enters. Across the continent, systems are being questioned. Alliances are being recalculated. Old hierarchies are being re-examined. South Africa's path is quieter than some of its neighbors. But quiet does not mean passive, it means calculated. So what does 31.4% really represent? It represents a test of whether incremental reform can outperform dramatic disruption, a test of whether institutional recalibration can achieve what confrontation cannot, a test of whether Africa's largest industrial economy can prove that structural repair is possible without collapse. The wind has shifted slightly. Now the only question left is this: will South Africa lean into it or let it fade? Let us know in the comments section. Is it a good sign for Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.